James had been invisible for years, just another face on the streets of New York. But one fateful day, he locked eyes with one of the most recognizable women in the world. Rihanna, the global superstar, stood frozen. In that moment, two worlds collided, and neither would ever be the same. What happened next would challenge everything they thought they knew about fame, struggle, and the power of human connection. Fifth Avenue bustled with its usual frenetic energy. Streams of people flowed along the sidewalks, their faces a blur of determination and distraction. Amidst this sea of humanity, James shuffled forward, his weathered boots scraping against the concrete. His presence barely registered with the hurrying masses, their eyes sliding past him as if he were part of the urban landscape. For James, each day on the streets was a battle for survival. The weight of his worn backpack containing his meager possessions pressed against his shoulders. His stomach growled, a constant reminder of the meals he'd missed. He'd long ago perfected the art of invisibility, a skill born of necessity in a world that seemed determined to look away. As he made his way past gleaming storefronts and towering skyscrapers, James's gaze remained fixed on the ground. He'd learned that eye contact often led to discomfort or, worse, confrontation. But something made him look up, a familiar face flickering at the edge of his vision. His heart skipped a beat as recognition dawned. Rihanna, the global superstar, stood just feet away. James blinked, certain his mind was playing tricks on him. But there she was, her presence as unmistakable as a bolt of lightning in a clear sky. Conflicting emotions surged within James. A part of him wanted to shrink away, to fade back into the anonymity of the streets. Another part felt a desperate urge to be seen, truly seen, if only for a moment. Before he could decide, their eyes met. Time seemed to slow. The cacophony of the city faded to a distant hum as James found himself locked in an unexpected moment of human connection. Rihanna's gaze, warm and curious, held his own. In that instant, the invisible barrier that separated their worlds seemed to waver. Rihanna hesitated, her body half turned as if to continue on her way. James could see the conflict playing across her features. He recognized the look. He'd seen it countless times before on the faces of passers-by, that moment of indecision between acknowledging his existence and pretending not to see. But something was different this time. Rihanna's expression shifted, a mix of compassion and an inexplicable urge winning out over the usual urban indifference. To James's astonishment, she took a step toward him. The unspoken barrier between them shattered as Rihanna closed the distance. "Hi," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm Rihanna. What's your name?" James found himself answering before he could think better of it. "James," he replied, his own voice rough from disuse. As curious onlookers began to take notice, Rihanna guided them to a quieter spot near a building's entrance. "Jamie," she repeated as if committing it to memory. "Would you like to talk for a bit?" And just like that, an unlikely conversation began, one that would alter the course of both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The busy avenue faded into the background as two people from vastly different worlds found common ground on a New York City sidewalk. They say never meet your heroes, but what happens when your hero meets you? As Rihanna and James began to talk, neither could have predicted the roller coaster of emotions that awaited them. Their conversation would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other's worlds. Rihanna's initial attempts at small talk fell flat against James's guarded demeanor. She commented on the weather, the bustle of the city, anything to break the ice. James responded with brief nods and one-word answers, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. The pop star's frustration grew with each failed attempt to connect. She was used to people opening up to her, not shutting down. James's skepticism was palpable, a barrier as solid as the concrete beneath their feet. His expression said it all. What could a millionaire celebrity possibly understand about his struggles? Rihanna paused, realizing her usual charm wasn't going to work here. She needed to change tactics. "Look," she said, her voice low and sincere. "I know this is weird. I'm not trying to be some savior or get good press. I saw you and something told me I needed to stop. To listen." James's eyebrows raised slightly, the first crack in his stoic facade. He studied her face, searching for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, he sighed. It's not that I don't appreciate it, but people like you, they swoop in, throw some money around, and think they fixed everything. That's not how it works out here. The harshness of his words hung in the air between them. Rihanna felt a flicker of defensiveness, but pushed it aside. This was about James, not her ego. She was about to respond when a gust of wind caught her oversized hat, sending it tumbling down the sidewalk. Without thinking, James lunged forward, snatching the hat just before it rolled into traffic. He turned back, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he handed it to her. Guess the wind doesn't care how famous you are, huh? Rihanna laughed, genuinely and without restraint. The absurdity of the moment, a homeless veteran rescuing a pop star's designer hat, wasn't lost on either of them. For a brief second, the walls came down, and they were just two people sharing an unexpected moment of levity on a New York street corner. As their laughter faded, James's expression softened. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. When I came back, nothing made sense anymore. The world had moved on without me. Rihanna listened intently, her earlier frustration replaced by genuine curiosity. She asked thoughtful questions, careful not to push too hard. Slowly, fragments of James's past emerged. The camaraderie he missed, the nightmares that lingered, the struggle to find his place in civilian life. With each word, Rihanna felt her preconceptions about homelessness and veterans crumbling. This wasn't a problem she could solve with a check or a few kind words. The complexity of James's situation began to sink in, and with it, a determination to truly understand. As their conversation deepened, the bustle of Fifth Avenue faded into background noise. James found himself sharing more than he had in years, surprised by Rihanna's genuine interest and lack of judgment. Her questions were thoughtful, her responses empathetic. Finally, James's stomach growled loudly, breaking the spell. Rihanna glanced at her watch, realizing how much time had passed. Hey, she said, there's a diner around the corner. What do you say we continue this over some food? My treat, no strings attached. James hesitated, old instincts warring with a newfound sense of trust. After a long moment, he nodded. All right, he said, but I'm ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. As they made their way down the sidewalk, curious onlookers did double takes at the unlikely pair. Rihanna and James, however, were too engrossed in conversation to notice, the invisible barrier between their worlds continuing to crumble with each step. The clink of coffee cups punctuated their conversation, but the real noise came from the shattering of assumptions. As James began to open up, Rihanna realized she was about to confront a reality far more complex than she'd imagined. What would his story reveal about the true cost of service? The diner's worn vinyl booth creaked as James shifted uncomfortably. He wrapped his calloused hands around the warm mug, eyes fixed on the swirling black liquid. Rihanna waited patiently, sensing the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. I enlisted right out of high school, James began, his voice low and gravelly. Thought I'd see the world, make my family proud. He paused, a flicker of emotion crossing his weathered features. And I did for a while. But the world I saw, it wasn't what I expected. Rihanna leaned in, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. As James spoke, fragments of his military service emerged like pieces of a complex puzzle. He described the camaraderie of his unit, the adrenaline of missions, and the crushing weight of responsibility. With each revelation, Rihanna's understanding of military life deepened, challenging her preconceptions. James's hands trembled slightly as he recounted his return to civilian life. You spend years learning how to be a soldier, but no one teaches you how to be a civilian again, he said, frustration evident in his voice. The skills that kept me alive over there, they don't mean much here. Rihanna's brow furrowed as she grappled with the implications. She had always assumed that support systems were in place for returning veterans. But surely there are programs, resources to help with the transition, she asked. A bitter laugh escaped James's lips. There are, but navigating that system, it's like trying to find your way through a maze blindfolded. And when you're already struggling, he trailed off, shaking his head. The weight of his words settled over the table. Rihanna found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about veteran support. The glossy image of triumphant homecomings and seamless reintegration crumbled in the face of James's reality. Suddenly, James's eyes grew distant. "There was this kid in my unit," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Martinez, barely old enough to drink, but there he was, watching my back in firefights." He swallowed hard, visibly affected by the memory. "One day we were on patrol and—" James's voice caught, the weight of his past and present circumstances palpable in the air between them. Rihanna reached out instinctively, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The simple gesture seemed to anchor him, and after a moment, he continued, sharing a story of loss, guilt, and the invisible scars of war. As James finished speaking, a heavy silence fell over the booth. Rihanna's mind raced, processing everything she had heard. The complexity of James's situation, the depth of his struggles, struck her with full force. In that moment, she made an impulsive decision. "James," she said, her voice filled with determination, "I want to help you get back on your feet, whatever it takes." James's head snapped up, surprise and wariness battling in his eyes. "I appreciate the offer, but—" he began, hesitation clear in his tone. Rihanna held up a hand, sensing his reluctance. "I know it's not that simple. I'm not looking for a quick fix or a feel-good story, but if you're willing, I'd like to try. We can figure it out together." James studied her face, searching for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, he let out a long breath. "I don't know," he said slowly. "It's been a long time since I've accepted help from anyone." His words hung in the air, setting the stage for a complex journey neither of them could fully anticipate. As they sat in that quiet diner, surrounded by the gentle hum of everyday life, the first tentative steps of an unlikely partnership began to take shape. The partnership forged over coffee was about to face its first real test. What unforeseen obstacles await when a global superstar tries to help a homeless veteran rebuild his life? The next 24 hours would reveal just how unprepared they both were for the journey ahead. Rihanna's team moved quickly, securing a small furnished apartment in a modest neighborhood. As they approached the building, James's steps slowed. The clean facade and manicured shrubs felt alien after years on the streets. Inside, the scent of fresh paint and new carpet hit him like a wave, simultaneously comforting and unsettling. "It's all yours," Rihanna said, handing him the keys. James's hand trembled slightly as he took them, the weight of metal unfamiliar after so long. He stood in the center of the living room, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in his reality. The soft couch, the gleaming kitchenette, the door that locked. It was almost too much to process. Rihanna watched James carefully, noting the mix of emotions playing across his face. She had anticipated joy, relief. Instead, she saw an uncertainty and a hint of fear. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. James ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the words. It's been a long time since I had four walls and a roof," he said. "I'm grateful, don't get me wrong. But it feels overwhelming," Rihanna offered. James nodded, relief evident in his eyes at being understood. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Rihanna's team worked tirelessly to address James's immediate needs. New clothes replaced his worn attire. A small prepaid phone ensured he could reach out if needed. Each item, while practical, added to James's growing sense of indebtedness. As night fell on the third day, James found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The bed was too soft, the silence too complete. He missed the ambient noise of the city, the constant alertness that had kept him alive on the streets. Restless, he paced the small apartment, feeling trapped by the very comforts meant to help him. Rihanna, for her part, was coming to terms with the complexity of the situation. She had naively assumed that providing housing would solve everything. Now she realized it was just the first step in a much longer journey. James's struggles with everyday tasks, using the shower, operating the microwave, were stark reminders of how much ground needed to be covered. Unexpected challenges arose at every turn. James's lack of identification made opening a bank account impossible. His gaps in employment history raised eyebrows at job interviews. Each setback chipped away at his fragile sense of progress, threatening to undo the tentative steps forward. As the week drew to a close, Rihanna visited James to check on his progress. She found him sitting on the apartment's small balcony, gazing out at the city. 7 days, he said without turning. Longest I've been off the streets in years. Rihanna sat beside him, sensing the significance of the moment. How does it feel? She asked. James was quiet for a long moment. Scary, he finally admitted, but good. Like maybe there's hope after all. As they sat there watching the sun set over the city, both Rihanna and James realized that this was just the beginning. The apartment was a critical first step, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. The real work of rebuilding a life was only just beginning. With a roof over his head, James should have been on the path to stability. Instead, he was about to face an enemy more formidable than any he'd encountered on the battlefield: bureaucracy. How would Rihanna react when she discovered that providing a home was the easiest part of their journey? The morning sun streamed through the apartment windows as Rihanna and James sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of paperwork. Forms, ID cards, and official letters covered every inch of the surface. James's brow furrowed as he sifted through the documents, his frustration palpable. I've tried this before, he admitted, his voice tinged with resignation. Every time I thought I was making progress, I'd hit another wall. Rihanna leaned forward, determination etched on her face. This time is different, she assured him. We're in this together. Their first stop was the local Veterans Affairs office. The waiting room buzzed with quiet conversations and the shuffle of papers. James tensed as they approached the counter, memories of past rejections flooding back. The clerk's eyes widened in recognition as she saw Rihanna, but to her credit, she maintained her professional demeanor. As they began the process of reinstating James's benefits, the complexity of the system became painfully clear. Each form seemed to lead to another, each answer spawning a dozen new questions. Hours ticked by, punctuated by phone calls, clarifications, and the constant whir of the copy machine. Rihanna watched James closely, noting the toll this was taking. His shoulders hunched, his responses becoming more clipped as the day wore on. When asked about his service record, his hand trembled slightly, eyes distant as he recounted dates and locations. I had no idea it was this complicated, Rihanna murmured, shaking her head. The stark reality of the challenges facing veterans was hitting her full force. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a check or a few phone calls. It was a systemic issue, a labyrinth of red tape and bureaucracy that left too many soldiers lost in the shuffle. As the afternoon stretched into evening, James's frustration boiled over. It's always the same, he said, voice tight with anger and disappointment. They send us over there, tell us we're heroes, but when we come back, we're just numbers on a form. Rihanna reached out, placing a hand on his arm. I hear you, she said softly, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out. Just as they were about to call it a day, a woman approached their table. I couldn't help overhearing, she said, introducing herself as Maria, a VA advocate. I'd like to help if you'll let me. Over the next hour, Maria guided them through the maze of paperwork with practiced ease. Her knowledge of the system, combined with her genuine empathy for James's situation, was a beacon of hope in the bureaucratic darkness. As they left the office, James's step was a little lighter. Thank you, he said to Rihanna, his voice rough with emotion, for sticking with this, for not giving up. Rihanna nodded, her mind racing. She realized that James's story, as unique as it was, represented countless others. Veterans across the country were facing these same battles, often alone and without the resources she could provide. As they walked back to the apartment, a new sense of purpose settled over them both. This wasn't just about helping one man anymore. It was about shining a light on a broken system and finding a way to make a real, lasting difference. As the dust settled on their battle with bureaucracy, James faced an internal struggle that no amount of paperwork could resolve. I need to contribute, he confessed to Rihanna, his eyes betraying a mix of determination and uncertainty. Little did they know, a chance encounter was about to set them on a path that would redefine the meaning of service and support for veterans across the nation. James's words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Rihanna studied his face, recognizing the restlessness that had been building over the past few weeks. The initial relief of having a roof over his head had given way to a deeper need for purpose. Rihanna gathered her team, determined to find a way for James to utilize his skills. They brainstormed tirelessly, exploring various employment options that might suit his background. James's military experience seemed like an asset, a wealth of leadership and organizational skills waiting to be tapped. However, reality proved more challenging than anticipated. Job interviews became exercises in frustration. Potential employers struggled to see past the gaps in James's resume, their eyes clouding with doubt as he explained his time on the streets. His military service, once a source of pride, now felt like a double-edged sword. "They thank me for my service," James said after another disappointing interview, his voice tinged with bitterness. "But they don't know what to do with me now." Rihanna watched as each setback chipped away at James's confidence. The man who had survived war and homelessness now seemed lost in the civilian world, his skills and experiences misunderstood or undervalued. As weeks passed without progress, tension built. James grew restless, spending long hours pacing the small apartment. Rihanna could see him withdrawing, the old walls threatening to rise again. Then on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed. James had ventured to a local park, seeking solace in the open air. He noticed a man sitting alone on a bench, his posture and thousand-yard stare instantly familiar. James approached cautiously, recognizing a fellow veteran in distress. Their conversation started hesitantly, but soon flowed freely, a shared language of experiences bridging the gap between strangers. As they talked, James felt something stir within him, a sense of connection and understanding he'd been missing for years. That evening, James burst into Rihanna's office, his eyes alight with an energy she hadn't seen before. "I know what I need to do," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. He described his encounter in the park, the instant bond formed with a fellow struggling veteran. "What if we created a program," James continued, his voice gaining strength, "run by veterans, for veterans? A place where we could support each other, where our experiences are understood and valued?" Rihanna listened intently, watching as James came alive with possibility. She saw the pieces falling into place, the leadership skills honed in the military, the deep understanding of veteran struggles, the desire to make a difference. "I think you're onto something big," Rihanna said, her own excitement growing. "Tell me more about how you envision this program." As James outlined his ideas, Rihanna's mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just a job for James, it was a calling, a way to transform his struggles into strength, to create meaning from the challenges he'd faced. "I want to help make this a reality," Rihanna said, her voice filled with determination. "Whatever resources you need, whatever connections I can provide, I'm all in." In that moment, their partnership took on new meaning. No longer was it simply about getting James back on his feet. They were embarking on a mission to create lasting change, to build a support system that could touch countless lives. As they dove into planning, the energy in the room was palpable. For the first time in years, James felt the weight of purpose settling on his shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a source of strength and hope for the future. The energy that filled that room would soon spill out into the world, igniting a firestorm of attention neither James nor Rihanna could have anticipated. Their private mission was about to become very, very public. It started with a whisper, a curious glance from a passerby who recognized Rihanna on one of her visits to James's apartment. Within days, social media was abuzz with speculation. Grainy phone photos of the unlikely pair appeared online, accompanied by a flurry of questions and assumptions. As the story gained traction, mainstream media outlets picked up the thread. Headlines blared across screens and newsstands. Pop star's secret project, Rihanna befriends homeless vet. The attention brought a whirlwind of opportunities and challenges crashing down on James and Rihanna. For James, the sudden visibility was jarring. After years of being invisible on the streets, he now found himself thrust into the spotlight. Cameras followed him on his daily walks. Reporters shouted questions about his past. The scrutiny was overwhelming, threatening to undo the fragile sense of stability he had built. "I didn't ask for this," James confided to Rihanna one evening, his voice tight with anxiety. "I'm not some feel-good story for people to gawk at." Rihanna, no stranger to public attention, faced her own set of challenges. Critics accused her of exploiting James for publicity, questioning her motives and commitment. Social media lit up with debates about celebrity activism and the complexities of addressing homelessness. The pressure mounted as James and Rihanna struggled to navigate this new terrain. They wanted to share their story authentically, to shed light on the larger issues facing veterans. But finding the right balance between openness and privacy proved difficult. James's fellow veterans had mixed reactions to his newfound platform. Some reached out with messages of support, grateful to see their struggles represented in the media. Others viewed him with suspicion, wondering if he had sold out for a taste of fame. As the noise grew louder, James and Rihanna realized they needed to take control of the narrative. After careful consideration, they agreed to a joint interview with a respected journalist known for her thoughtful coverage of social issues. The day of the interview arrived, tension palpable in the studio. As the cameras rolled, James spoke with raw honesty about his experiences, his voice steady as he recounted the challenges of life after service. Rihanna listened intently, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When it was her turn to speak, Rihanna's words were measured but passionate. She addressed the criticism head-on, acknowledging her own learning process and emphasizing the systemic issues they had uncovered. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about the thousands of veterans like James who fall through the cracks every day. We have to do better." As the interview aired, something shifted in the public conversation. The authenticity of their partnership shone through, challenging preconceptions about both celebrity activism and veteran homelessness. Social media buzzed with renewed interest, this time focused on the larger issues at hand. In the days that followed, James and Rihanna found themselves at the center of a growing movement. The spotlight that had once felt harsh now illuminated the gaps in veteran support systems, sparking discussions in living rooms and legislative chambers alike. For James, it was a bittersweet victory. As he watched the impact of their story unfold, he couldn't help but think of the countless others still struggling in silence. The journey ahead was long, but for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of real hope. Hope is a powerful catalyst, but transforming it into tangible change requires more than just good intentions. James and Rihanna were about to learn just how steep the climb from concept to reality could be. The small apartment that had once seemed like a sanctuary now buzzed with nervous energy. James paced the living room, his mind racing with plans and doubts in equal measure. Rihanna sat at the kitchen table, her phone a constant lifeline to her network of contacts. They had a vision for a veteran support program, but turning that vision into reality was proving to be a monumental task. Fundraising became their first hurdle. James's military precision came in handy as he drafted detailed proposals, his hands steady even as his voice wavered with emotion while explaining the program's potential impact. Rihanna leveraged her celebrity status, but found that even her star power had its limits when it came to securing long-term commitments. As weeks turned into months, the magnitude of their undertaking became painfully clear. Late one night, James slumped onto the couch, his face etched with fatigue. "What if we're in over our head?" he asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at them both. Rihanna sat beside him, her own exhaustion evident in the dark circles under her eyes. "We can't give up now," she said softly. "There are too many people counting on us." Despite the challenges, glimmers of hope began to emerge. James's leadership skills, honed through years of military service, found new purpose in this civilian battleground. He navigated complex logistics with the same calm determination that had once guided his unit through treacherous terrain. Rihanna watched in admiration as the man who had once struggled to find his place now commanded rooms full of potential donors and partners. Rihanna's network proved invaluable as she gathered a team of experts from various fields. Mental health professionals, job placement specialists, and legal advocates joined their cause, each bringing unique insights to the program's development. The pop star's ability to connect with people on a personal level, regardless of their background, helped forge unexpected alliances. One particularly tense meeting with city officials took an unexpected turn when a stern-faced bureaucrat revealed that his own son was a struggling veteran. The room fell silent as he shared his family's story, his voice thick with emotion. By the end of the day, they had secured not only the necessary permits, but also a passionate advocate within the local government. As their launch date approached, the small apartment transformed into a makeshift command center. Whiteboards covered in flowcharts and to-do lists lined the walls. The kitchen table disappeared under stacks of brochures and training materials. James and Rihanna worked tirelessly, their shared purpose bridging the vast differences in their backgrounds. Finally, after months of preparation, setbacks, and small victories, the day arrived. James stood before a small group of veterans, his heart pounding but his voice steady as he welcomed them to the program. Rihanna watched from the sidelines, her eyes shining with pride and hope. As the first participants began their journey, James and Rihanna shared a quiet moment of reflection. They knew the real work was just beginning, but for now they allowed themselves to savor this hard-won victory. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but they were no longer walking it alone. James stood before a small group of veterans, his voice steady as he shared his journey from the streets to the helm of their fledgling program. The room buzzed with a nervous energy, hope mingling with skepticism. As he finished speaking, a hush fell over the audience. Then slowly, hands began to rise. Questions poured forth, each one a testament to the deep well of need that existed within the veteran community. Word spread quickly. Veterans from across the city, and soon the state, reached out for help. James's phone rang constantly, each call a lifeline thrown into the darkness of struggle and isolation. The program's modest office became a beacon of hope, its walls lined with photos of success stories and thank you notes scrawled on scraps of paper. But with success came new challenges. The small team struggled to keep up with the influx of requests. Late nights became the norm as James and his staff pored over applications, stretched resources to their limits, and grappled with the heart-wrenching task of deciding who they could help immediately and who would have to wait. Rihanna watched the growing demand with a mix of pride and concern. She had underestimated the depth of need within the veteran community, and the weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. "We can't turn anyone away," she insisted during a tense meeting with James and the program's board, "but we need to find a way to grow sustainably." As they worked to expand their capacity, stories of transformed lives began to emerge. There was Michael, a former Marine who had been living in his car for 2 years. With the program's help, he secured housing and found work as a mechanic. Sarah, an Army veteran struggling with PTSD, flourished in the program's peer support groups and went on to become a mentor herself. These success stories caught the attention of local media, and soon larger outlets came calling. James found himself thrust into the role of spokesperson, his quiet demeanor giving way to passionate advocacy as he spoke about the challenges facing veterans. Rihanna used her platform to amplify these voices, leveraging her star power to bring attention to the systemic issues underlying veteran homelessness and unemployment. The conversations sparked by their initiative reached beyond the veteran community. Policymakers took notice, inviting James to testify before state committees on veteran affairs. Corporate partners, inspired by the program's success, stepped forward with job training initiatives and hiring commitments. As the program's impact grew, so did the vision for its future. James and Rihanna huddled with their team, mapping out plans for expansion. They identified cities with high concentrations of struggling veterans and began laying the groundwork for satellite offices. The model they had built, born from James's experiences and refined through trial and error, held promise for replication on a national scale. One evening, as James locked up the office after another long day, he paused to take in the sight of the bustling street around him. He thought back to the days when he had been invisible to the world, just another faceless figure on the sidewalk. Now he stood at the center of a movement, his voice carrying weight in rooms where decisions were made. The journey from invisibility to impact had been long and arduous. But as he watched a group of veterans leaving a support meeting, their faces lighter than when they had arrived, he knew every step had been worth it. James took a deep breath, his fingers gripping the edges of the podium as he surveyed the sea of faces before him. The National Veterans Conference Hall buzzed with anticipation, a mix of dress uniforms and civilian attire filling the rows. He blinked, the bright stage lights momentarily disorienting him as he reflected on the improbable journey that had led him to this moment. Just a few years ago, he had been invisible, another nameless figure shuffling along city streets. Now he stood as a beacon of hope for thousands. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. These weren't just strangers in an audience. They were brothers and sisters in arms, many still fighting battles long after leaving the service. James cleared his throat, his voice steady as he began to speak. He shared his story without embellishment, the raw honesty of his words captivating the crowd. He spoke of the loneliness of homelessness, the struggle to find purpose in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. As he described the day he met Rihanna, a ripple of surprise moved through the audience. "I was skeptical," James admitted, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I thought it was just another celebrity looking for good press, but I was wrong." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "What I found was a partner, someone willing to listen and learn, someone who saw me as a person, not a problem to be solved." The room fell silent as James detailed the challenges they had faced in building the program. He spoke of late nights poring over paperwork, of doors slammed in their faces, of moments when giving up seemed like the only option. But with each setback, he emphasized the strength they found in perseverance and the power of believing in second chances. As James neared the end of his speech, the tension in the room was palpable. Veterans leaned forward in their seats, many nodding in recognition of their own struggles. "We've made progress," James said, his voice growing stronger, "but there's still so much work to be done." He outlined ambitious plans for the future, expanding to new cities, partnering with employers committed to hiring veterans, and pushing for policy changes to address the root causes of veteran homelessness. The energy in the room shifted, hope and determination replacing the earlier skepticism. As James finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the audience erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. James stood there, momentarily overwhelmed by the response. Suddenly, Rihanna appeared at his side, her presence a surprise to both James and the audience. She squeezed his hand, a gesture of support and shared purpose that spoke volumes. As the applause continued, James and Rihanna stood together, their unlikely partnership a symbol of what could be accomplished when barriers were broken and common ground was found. As they made their way off the stage, a young woman in dressed blues approached James, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need help." James paused, sensing the weight of her unspoken struggles. He nodded, understanding that this moment, this connection, was why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. A new chapter was beginning, not just for him, but for countless others ready to reclaim their lives and their dignity. As the applause faded and the conference hall emptied, James and Rihanna stood at the edge of the stage, their unlikely partnership a testament to the power of human connection. They had bridged worlds that seemed impossibly far apart, proving that compassion could transcend fame, wealth, and social status. Yet both knew their work was far from over. For every veteran who found hope through their program, countless others still struggled in silence. The systemic issues that led to homelessness and isolation among veterans remained deeply entrenched, requiring sustained effort and advocacy to address. Their journey had shattered preconceptions on all sides. James had learned that not all offers of help came with hidden agendas, while Rihanna had gained a profound understanding of the complexities facing veterans. Together, they challenged others to look beyond stereotypes and see the humanity in every person, regardless of their circumstances. As they prepared to leave the stage, a young veteran approached, seeking help. It was a poignant reminder that their mission continued, one life at a time. The road ahead was long, but they were no longer walking it alone.